Hi friends, welcome again. This is the channel Grow with One, and let us discuss about the history of technology timeline. Within 3.3 million years ago, the first tools have been existed in the history. The history of technology begins even before the beginning of our own species. Sharp flakes of stone used as knives and larger, unshaped stones used as hammers and anvils have been uncovered at Lake Turkana in Kenya. The tools were made 3.3 million years ago and thus were likely used by an ancestor such as Australopithecus. 1 million years ago, there is a fire. When humanity first used fire is not definitely known, but like the first tools, it was probably invented by an ancestor of Homo sapiens. Evidence of burnt material can be found in caves used by Homo erectus beginning about 1 million and maybe even 1.5 million years ago. At the 20,000 BC or 15,000 years ago, Neolithic revolution was there. During this period, the Neolithic, several key technologies arose together. Humans moved from getting their food by foraging to getting it through agriculture. People came together in larger groups. Clay was used for pottery and bricks. Clothing began to be made of woven fabrics. The wheel was also likely invented at this time. At the 6000 BCE, there was an irrigation. The first irrigation system arose roughly simultaneously in the civilization of the Tigris Euphrates River Valley in Mesopotamia and the Nile River Valley in Egypt. Since irrigation requires an extensive amount of work, it shows a high level of social organization. At 4000 BCE, there was a activity of sailing. The first sailing ships were used on the Nile River. Since the Nile does not allow as much space for free sailing as the ocean, these ships also had oars for navigation. At the age of 1200 BCE, there was iron. About this time, the production of iron became widespread as that metal supplanted bronze. Iron was much more abundant than copper and tin, the two metals that make up bronze, and thus put metal tools into more hands than ever before. At the age of 850 CE, there was a gunpowder. Alchemists in China invented gunpowder as a result of their search for life extending elixirs. It was used to propel rockets attached to arrows. The knowledge of gunpowder spread to Europe in the 13th century. In 1950, windmill was found. Nearly 5,000 years after the first sailing ships, the wind was first used to operate a mill. The first windmills were in Persia. They were horizontal windmills in which the blades were set on a vertical shaft. Later, European windmills were of the typical and vertical type. It has been speculated that the windmill may have been invented independently in Persia and in Europe. In 1044, there is a compass. The first definitive Mention of the magnetic compass dates from a Chinese book finished in 1044. It describes how soldiers found their way by using a fish-shaped piece of magnetized iron floating in a bowl of water when the sky was too cloudy to see the stars. In 1250 to 1300, there is a mechanical clock. Hourglass and water clocks had been around for centuries, but the first mechanical clocks began to appear in Europe towards the end of the 13th century and were used in cathedrals to mark the time when services would be held. In 1455, printing. There is printing. Johannes Gutenberg completed the printing of the Bible, which was the first book printed in the West using movable type. Gutenberg's printing press led to an information explosion in Europe. In 1765, there is a steam engine. The person James Watt improved the new common steam engine by adding a condenser that turned the steam back into liquid water. This condenser was separate from the cylinder that moved the piston, which meant that the engine was much more efficient. The steam engine became one of the most important inventions of the Industrial Revolution. In 1804, there is a railway. English engineer Richard Trevithick improved James Watt's steam engine and used it for transport. He built the first railway locomotive at an ironworks in Wales. In 1807, there is a steamboat. Robert Fulton put the steam engine on water. His steamboat, that was eventually called the Clermont, took 32 hours to go up the Hudson River from New York City to Albany. Sailing ships took 4 days. In 1826-27, there is a photography. In the early 1820s, Nicephore Niepce became interested in using a light-sensitive solution to make copies of lithographs onto glass, zinc, and finally pewter plate. He then had the great idea to use his solution to make a copy of an image in a camera obscura, a room or box with a small hole in one end through which an image of the outside is projected. In 1826 or 1827, he made an 8-hour-long exposure of the courtyard of his house, the first known photograph. In 1831, there is a reaper. For thousands of years, harvesting crops was very labor intensive. That changed with Cyrus Maccormick's invention of the mechanical reaper. The earliest reaper had some mechanical problems, but later versions spread throughout the world. In 1844, there is a telegraph. Samuel Morse was a successful painter who became interested in the possibility of an electric telegraph in the 1830s. He patented a prototype in 1837. In 1844, he sent the first message over the first long-distance telegraph line, which stretched between Washington D.C. and Baltimore. The message, "What hath God wrought?" 1876, there is a telephone. Once it was possible to send information through a wire in the form of dots and dashes. The next step was actual voice communication. Alexander Graham Bell made the first telephone call on March 10, 1876, when he asked his assistant Tom Watson to come to him. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." In 1876, internal combustion engine. German engineer Nicholas Otto built an engine that, unlike the steam engine, used the burning of fuel inside the engine to move a piston. This type of engine would later be used to power automobiles. In 1879, there is an electric light. After thousands of trials, American inventor Thomas Edison got a carbon filament light bulb to burn for 13 and a half hours. Edison and others in his laboratory were also working on an electrical power distribution system to light homes and businesses. And in 1882, the Edison Electric Illuminating Company opened the first power plant. In 1885, automobiles have been spread. The internal combustion engine improved, becoming smaller and more efficient. Carl Benz used a one-cylinder engine to power the first modern automobile, a three-wheeled car that he drove around a track. However, the automobile did not make a commercial splash until 1888, when his wife Bertha separated with Carl's slow, methodical pace, took an automobile without his knowledge on a 64-mile trip to see her mother. 1901, there is a radio. Guglielmo Marconi had been experimenting with radio since 1894 and was sending transmissions over longer and longer distances. In 1901, his reported transmission of the Morse code letter S across the Atlantic from Cornwall to Newfoundland excited the world. In 1903, there is an airplane. On December 17, Orville Wright made the first airplane flight of 120 feet near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. He and his brother Wilbur made 4 flights that day. On the last, Wilbur flew 852 feet. In 1926, rocket try. As a young boy in the late 1890s, Robert Goddard was inspired by H.G. Wells, the War of the Worlds, and the possibilities of space travel. As a middle-aged man in the mid-1920s, he achieved the first test flight of a liquid-fueled rocket from his aunt's farm in Auburn, Massachusetts. The rocket flew 12.5 meters, 41 feet in the air. In 1927, there is a television. After the development of radio, the transmission of an image was the next logical step. Early television used a mechanical disc to scan an image. As a teenager in Utah, Philo T. Farnsworth became convinced that a mechanical system would not be able to scan and assemble images multiple times a second. Only an electronic system would do that. In 1922, the 16-year-old Farnsworth worked out a plan for such a system, but it wasn't until 1927 that he made the first electronic television transmission, a horizontal line. In 1937, there is a computer. Iowa State mathematician and physicist John Atansoff designed the first electronic digital computer. It would use binary numbers, base 2, in which all numbers are expressed with the digits 0 and 1, and its data would be stored in capacitors. In 1939, he and his student Clifford Berry began building the Atansoff Berry computer ABC. In 1942, nuclear power has been found, which is more disastrous than any other researches. As part of the Manhattan Project to build the first atomic bomb, it was necessary to understand nuclear reactions in detail. On December 2, underneath the football stands at the University of Chicago, a team of physicists led by Enrico Fermi used uranium to produce the first self-sustaining chain reaction. In 1947, there is a transistor. On December 23, Bell Labs engineers John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley gave the first public demonstration of the transistor, an electrical component that could control, amplify, and generate current. The transistor was much smaller and used less power than vacuum tubes and ushered in an era of cheap small electronic devices. In 1957, there is a space flight. The Soviet Union surprised the world on October 4 when it launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, a small 83.6 kg metal sphere. The space race began between the Soviet Union and the United States, opening up a new front in the Cold War. In 1974, there is a personal computer. The first computers that emerged after World War II were gigantic, but with advances in technology, especially in putting many transistors on a semiconductor chip, computers became both smaller and more powerful. Finally, they became small enough for home use. The first such personal computer was the Altair, which was soon supplanted in 1977 by the Apple II, the TRCT, and the Commodore PET. In 1974, there is the Internet. Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn produced the TCP/IP Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, which describes how data can be broken down into smaller pieces called packets and how these packets can be transmitted to the right destination. TCP or IP became the basis for how data is transmitted over the internet. In 2007, there is an iPhone. Apple released its smartphone, that is the iPhone. Although it was not the first smartphone, it became widely popular because of its simple touch-sensitive multi-sensor interface. The touchscreen allowed users to manipulate all programs and telephone functions with their fingertips rather than a stylus or physical keys. In 2012, CRISPR, American biochemist Jennifer Doudna and French microbiologist Emmanuel Carpenter developed CRISPR Cas9, a method for editing genes, that is, making changes to DNA sequences. Gene editing has the potential to treat many diseases but also opens up the ethical gray area of creating designer humans. In 2017, there is artificial intelligence. The team behind the AlphaGo artificial intelligence program announced that it had become the world's best Go player. Go is a game with a very simple rules but many possible positions. The previous year, AlphaGo had defeated the great player Lee Sedol in a match 4-1. AlphaGo then played itself and through continual improvement was able to defeat the version that had defeated Lee 100-0. Through machine learning, AlphaGo had become better at the game than any human. In 2022, there is a ChatGPT. OpenAI released ChatGPT and artificial intelligence AI, the software program that allows a user to ask it questions using conversational or natural languages. ChatGPT impressed many with its command of written English and as a demonstration of how far artificial intelligence has advanced. Within 5 days of its introduction, more than 1 million users had signed up for a free account. Thanks for watching, friends.